So now as we're getting a little bit more familiar with the system, we're going to talk a little bit about troubleshooting issues with TDS. Now TDS is the measurement of total dissolved solids in your water. Now we're going to talk about understanding how to utilize our TDS data to determine if it's time for a filter change. 9 times out of 10, a TDS issue is in regards to a filter that is not performing and it requires changing. The key is finding out what. So first and foremost, let's talk about measuring TDS. So with our accessory bundle, every system comes with a TDS meter. It's got a simple on and off button and a hold button. So you'll turn on your TDS meter, and you'll notice you have a little cup here. That's what you're going to use to fill water. So, most importantly, to know how the system's going to perform, we need to know how high is the ppm, parts per million, of TDS in the water. So we're going to take a quick sample. Okay, looking about 84 ppm. That's pretty low, pretty low. Let's take another quick measurement. Hot side. All right, we got pretty low TDS to be working with. All right, so we know that our incoming source in this scenario is 84 ppm. So now I'm going to go ahead and run water into our system. Make sure everything's nice and tight, hooked up and ready to go. So now, we're going to see how efficient is this RO membrane. Quite simply put, that's to see how much of that TDS is going to be removed from the RO membrane. Now, your sediment and chloramine filters are taking out debris and chemicals. You're really going to see your noticeable change from the RO leading into the DI. Now, on this particular model, we have a bypass. So, measuring your RO is actually kind of easy. You don't have to disconnect any hoses. However, some of the older models of Plus systems, you'll notice just an inlet without a bypass. At that point, you measure from the push fit 90 that is sticking out of the DI. So I'm going to go ahead and get a measurement. It's only been running for a couple minutes, so we'll just get an initial reading. And the RO has brought it down to 4, 80 to 4. So we still have that 90 and change as far as efficiency. So you see we have our bypass, there's our RO flow. Now, let's measure how efficient the DI is. Now the DI is going to separate the ions from the pure water, and any of those discharged ions are here. And brought it down to 1 ppm. And mind you, it's still running. So, okay. We know that our system is running, it's purifying. We know our membrane is taking out like 95, 99% of the solids, and our DI is polishing off. Now, you may find that your system is putting out 20, 30 ppm, and you're trying to figure out, oh no, something's wrong. What do I need to change? What's wrong? Well, we're going to start by measuring each of the stages of filtration. So for instance, if I find that my incoming source we have 85, let's say it's 185 for argument's sake. And outside of the membrane, it's only coming down to 90. And then from that point, I'm getting 90 to 40. So I'm not getting 0 ppm out of my system. How do I determine what's the source of the problem? Work backwards. So we know already the system isn't producing pure water. Now, what is feeding this housing in order for it to perform? The RO membrane. So you would measure the RO water and compare that to the TDS level of your incoming to see that kind of percentage. If you're getting 80% efficiency, well, you know, at that point, it's really time for a change because your RO is not performing to that 95 to 99 bracket that we're trying to shoot for. However, I mentioned that the DI was also not performing. That could tell you one of two things. A, your resin is also expired, or B, your resin has prematurely expired because your RO membrane is already not performing enough and that DI chamber is being hit with more TDS. So it's important to work your way backwards to determine if the problem is before the indicator. Think of it like symptoms of a disease. Sometimes a symptom is another disease. So sometimes the problem is not always where it's showing. Now you might measure your incoming TDS and find that your membrane is performing properly, brings it down from that 185 to about 30. And you're like, okay, I have enough purification going on from my RO housing, but what about my DI? My system's only putting out 30. Chances are it's time for a resin change. At that point, change out your resin cartridge. Make sure your cartridge is overpacked, properly sealed, lubricated, and placed into its housing accordingly. And then tightened up into the cap with a good seal to ensure no water is getting where it shouldn't, and the resin chamber can then begin to properly operate. So make sure both placement and resin levels are okay before determining that the problem is not the resin. So all in all, make sure your resin is correct. It's important, as we're working backwards, to not neglect our pre-filter housings here. Now, these pre-filters are the first step in protecting your RO membrane, meaning that's the first thing you're going to be changing and the thing that you're going to be changing the most. You'll want to change these filters when you see a noticeable change in flow. After that, you want to make sure that you're maintaining these changes in order to maximize the lifetime of your RO membrane. This is your most expensive filter to change, so it's important to protect that. On the subject of maintaining RO membranes, it's important to acknowledge the storage of this system to help protect this housing. Now, these systems are not designed to use in the wintertime, and they are not designed to use in freezing temperatures. So when you are storing your system, especially if you're in a colder environment or it's wintertime, you want to make sure that you're storing it in a heated environment, whether it's a heated garage or in your truck that's in a garage. I don't personally recommend keeping it inside a truck that's going to sit outside and potentially freeze. Now, why is that? When you have this RO membrane, it is made of fiberglass and it is layered. And there's a lot of perforations inside. And with heat and cold, it can expand and contract. And that can cause the internal structure to crack and cause issues in lacking purification or lacking flow. So it's important while you're taking care of this membrane as far as filter changes that you're taking care of it environmentally. So with that being said, never let your system freeze. If you fear that your system has frozen, run some diagnostics, run water through, see if you're achieving the flow that you're looking for, and see if you're getting the purification that you're looking for by testing each stage of your system. Another thing to acknowledge as far as storage is that this RO membrane is in a closed steel housing, meaning water has nowhere to go after it's not in use. And stagnant water leads to bacterial growth. And you don't want to see microbial growth inside of your RO membrane. Why is that? Well, first of all, your membrane's not going to be efficient. You're going to run into issues of flow because the bacteria and those spores are going to clog up that perforation that's inside this housing. So you want to make sure that no bacteria can grow in stagnant water. And that is where the RO Guardian comes into play. So this RO Guardian powder is a powder used to help winterize your system or prepare it for longer term storage. And that longer term storage, I'm talking 2-3 weeks of non-usage. You don't want to risk any sort of bacteria ruining this expensive filter. So as far as wintertime goes, you'll take this packet, you're going to mix it with water, disconnect your inlet to the DI so none of this water travels into the resin chamber. And you'll want to pour slowly this mixed liquid into the RO cap. Obviously, you'll remove the cap and clamps again to expose the membrane. And you'll pour in almost like you're pickling this membrane. Once you've done so and filled it to the top, you're good to close it off and store your system for either a long period of time or winter time. Maintaining your filter changes as well as proper storage will maximize the lifetime of your RO membrane. So make sure you keep up with all of that.